Hey, what's up, guys? It's Bakes here, and thank you for joining me for this episode of my random album reviews. Today's album that I'll be reviewing is the third full length studio album by the band Waterparks from the year 2019. Today's album is titled Fandom. Now, as usual with my random album reviews, I'll start off with a little bit of history between myself and this album. I'll break down the album as a whole. I'll also get into a few of the tracks, and then finish off the review with a rating out of 10 and my overall thought of the album. So without delaying any longer, we might as well get straight into it. You guys know how these videos work if you've been on my channel before. So at the time of this album's drop, I was more of a casual fan of the band compared to how I am now. I enjoyed their first debut full-length album, Double Dare, but not as much as many others did at the time. Since Fandom's release, though, back in 2019, that album Double Dare has grown on me a lot, actually. The follow-up and second full-length album, titled Entertainment, which I also enjoyed, though was very aware that it was a step down in quality from Double Dare, and even now I stand by it being the weakest of their first three albums. So with the rocky reception to my first taste of their first album and second album, you might presume that the first time I listened to Fandom it swept me off my feet, but no, actually it was the same sort of thing here. I wasn't impressed straight away. The first single off this album was a track called Turbulence, which I didn't love, honestly. So at the time I was just kind of thinking, okay, I guess this is just going to be another Waterparks album that is fine, I don't mind it, it's okay. Though that song really has grown on me over time, but even before that, for some reason, I held on to a strong curiosity for this album, and I was actually, even though I wasn't impressed with the first leading single being Turbulence, I was actually just really interested to see what would come of this album, and it was one that stayed on my radar till its full-length release date. And I'm so happy I held on to that curiosity, because once the whole album dropped, I fell in love with it, to the point where it was actually my favourite album of that year. I've actually done a video on my channel already ranking my favourite albums from 2019. If you've watched it, you guys would know that this was my number one. And I actually remember very clearly that it was a two-horse race that year. It was between this album and Nulla Vita by Grayscale, and I remember very clearly really tossing up which album I like more. But as I said, by the time of doing that video ranking my favourite albums in 2019, this one took the cake. So before we go any further into this review, I'm sure you guys can sort of get a gist of how much I really do like Fandom by Waterparks. This album for me has always stayed pretty strong and pretty consistent, with plenty of replay value for myself over the years. Most people will describe Waterparks as a pop punk band, but I will say if I want more pop punk leaning Waterparks, which if you guys have seen my music content before on my channel, you guys know that pop punk is my favourite subgenre of music. So when I want more pop punk leaning Waterparks, I'll probably go to another album of theirs being Double Dare, where I feel like on that album it's a little bit more consistent, but there's still enough here to hold me over, with a couple of examples being songs like Easy to Hate or I Felt Younger When We Met, just to name a couple. Though Waterparks have always lent more into the pop side of pop punk, with examples of this album again being Dream Boy, Telephone, and Worst, just to name a handful again. But if you know Waterparks well, you would know that they're harder to pigeonhole in a genre than just saying that they're pop or pop punk. Even though they've always jokingly referred to themselves as God's favourite boy band, they can get fairly heavy when they want to, and they can really grit and show their teeth, with songs like War Crimes and Turbulent off this album. But at moments, they've never been strangers to having electronic influence either, with songs like Reboot and, you could say again, Turbulent. But like I said, and as you can probably tell, they're hard to put a label on. But with this album in particular, out of every album that they've done to date, I really feel like there's a wide enough variety to almost please anyone who's into, the alternative styles of music. As I said, there's heavier moments, there's electronic moments, there's poppier radio sounding moments, and then there's some like genuine pop punk stuff that, fans of the subgenre like myself has plenty to sink their teeth into as well. Now, you'd have to be completely checked out while listening to this album to not realize there's an overall theme in its writing about relationships, or to be more specific, the end of a extremely rocky relationship. So a lot of the songs here not only take aim at a specific target, or at least it seems to be taking aim at a specific target, but takes aim, does not choke the kill shot, and flexes the middle finger while doing so. Whoever this girl was, you can presume she was once in the life of lead vocalist Austin Knight. Fuck, what a bitter pill to swallow listening to this album when it first dropped. That must have been fucking brain rattling. But as much as there's example after example of openly calling out this past flame, there is also plenty of songs taking a deeper perspective as well. Examples expressing the lasting depressive impact left on Austin after this relationship. Himself also potentially being at fault in some cases, and needing a lot when his life on the road possibly couldn't give the same back. You know, that's all a deeper perspective that he's happy to put into the writing through this album. But like I said, once you take a break looking at it from a new and more open perspective, the band flip back to, nah, still fuck you, fuck your friends, fuck your family, and for good measure, fuck you again. And I just really love the overall writing on this album. Like with the many ranges and styles that this album packs in, the song's messages ain't just all one note either. Like I've spoken about, many of them are negative relationship themed, like I went through before, but there's positive moments looking on love as well. You know, songs like Dream Boy and Telephone with a more upbeat and hopeful with its intentions. And then again, taking aim on topics, but not always an ex or a past relationship. The track War Crimes practically takes aim at seemingly everything. But the most interesting example for me is the second song on the album being Watch What Happens Next, which takes aim at the band's own scene and genre outlook, speaking about how in the punk and alternative scene, it's less welcomed when you try new things or explore genres. It's frowned upon to want more from the genre, whether it's more promotion, more money, or once you get that money, you can't be flexing it. Or speaking of flexing, you can't be flexing yourself or your music either. And I'm not saying that I agree or disagree, or what side of the fence that I sit on with that topic. But I 100% understand the perspective that Waterparks go for off that song. You know, if you look at the hip-hop and rap genre, or even more lately in the pop genre, there's a lot of artists flexing money and flexing about how they're the best at what they do and the best in the genre. It's not very common in the punk and alternative scene, and Waterparks are asking the question, why can't we do that also? And I also think it explains the album's purposeful variety of styles as well. As I said, Watch What Happens Next asks the question, why can't we try different genres and different styles? So with this album, the band's gone, you know what, we're going to put heavy stuff. We're going to put pop songs. We're going to put electronic stuff. We're going to do pop punk. We're going to have songs that are going to make you scratch your head, but this is us just doing our thing and trying different styles, and I think that's a really cool thing to do. This album is made up of a 15-song track list, but it doesn't nearly feel that long because each of the songs are fairly quick and punchy, but there are a few tracks there that are also possibly just there to be filler, you know, songs like Group Chat or interlude-like track being Zone Out, or you could even sort of sum up Cherry Red into that category as well, which getting into Cherry Red is so fucking catchy and is a really cool way to open the album. It's a shame it's just so short. The album, though, truly takes shape with the second track being the previously spoken about Watch What Happens Next, then into the track that could probably encapsulate the album most of all, being Dream Boy. The album was never going to be called Dream Boy though, because if you don't know, the band name their albums in alphabetical order. For example, Double Dare went to Entertainment, went to Fandom. After Fandom was Greatest Hits. I'm sure you guys got the gist. But Dream Boy, and then the next track, Easy to Hate, probably two of the most well-known and popular off the album. And then to the first acoustic song off this album being High Definition, which I never really got into the acoustic stuff earlier when I was speaking about the songs in this review, but later appears again with songs like Never Bloom Again, and in a way, somewhat the track Worst as well. Continuing with the track list, a sneaky call for most underrated song off the album, and possibly you could also say fairly well known because of its appearance in a Netflix show, but we have the song Telephone, which is an addictive shot of energy, which is then followed by the group chat interlude, which then goes to the leading single Turbulent, which I brought up before. And I said that I didn't love that song the first time around, but it has grown on me for sure. And at the end of the day, probably was a good one to be the leading single for this album. Firstly, because the song alone is quite diverse in its styles, and as I said, overall on this album, there are a lot of styles that the band throw at you. But again, the album is almost this big, I was about to say love letter, but hate letter to an ex, and this song alone is a punch to the fucking windpipe, so it sets pace for kind of what to expect with the writing as well. So like I said, probably a good one to choose as the leading single off this album. Now to the earlier mentioned second acoustic song, Never Bloom Again, which pops up at track number 9, but then you go to track 10, the basic yet catchy song, I Miss Having Sex, but at least I Don't Want to Die Anymore. And I know I said earlier Telephone was one of the picks that you could go for most underrated, but then we also have the next track being War Crimes, which if you liked the songs Made in America and Little Violence off the popular album of theirs Double Dare, you're gonna love War Crimes because it fits that mold very, very well. The electronic leaning and experimental track Reboot comes in at track number 12, and then to the final acoustic track, In a Way being worst. And the reason why I emphasize In a Way, because none of the acoustic songs offered off this album are your typical acoustic efforts, but especially the track Worst. Check it out and you'll sort of know what I mean. To the second to closing interlude-like song being Zone Out, which is just a slower, shortened sample of the earlier song Dream Boy, to the final track which truly rewards the pop punk fan, being the song I Felt Younger When We Met. As I said, if you're a pop punk fan and you've sat through this whole album and nothing has hit your sweet tooth yet, trust me, I Felt Younger When We Met being the closing song definitely will. And that rounds out the entire track list. But just describing these songs isn't enough, because there really is enough switch-ups of styles for plenty of people to enjoy. And of course there are front runners that a lot of people definitely favour, as do myself, songs like Dream Boy, Easy to Hate, and Watch What Happens Next. But please don't gloss over the underrated gems as well, songs like Telephone and War Crimes. Both of them are really fucking cool songs as well. As I wrap up my thoughts for this review, I never really touched on people's perspective of the band around the time of this album, which to be fair, I myself don't entirely know all the ins and outs, but at the time of this album's release, Waterparks, and in particular their frontman Austin Knight, were considered a little controversial within the genre. And from what I know, I could be wrong. If there's more to it, feel free to let me know in the comments below, fill me in. It seems like they were quite controversial and getting a little bit of hate because of what I was speaking about earlier, their song Watch What Happens Next. They were sort of going about their scene in that way, they were calling out record labels and companies and other bands within the scene and other people, saying like, we want to change up genres too, we want more money, we want more promotion. And as I said, within the punk and alternative scene, that's sort of a no-no, so they were getting a little bit of hate and controversy around that. But if it's all controversial around that, and they're getting hated because they want to hype themselves up and they want bigger and better things, and is it really worth all the hate? Like, looking back at it from that perspective, is it really worth all the controversy? Like, is it really that bad? Because honestly, I have nothing wrong with what they're saying, though like I said earlier, I don't have a side of the fence that I really sit on. Is it really that bad? From what it seems, they've become a lot more accepted recently, like they were in their early half of their careers, but welcomed by more fans and peers in the genre as well. I've actually heard a lot of well-known, big, established bands say that Waterparks are becoming modern favourites of theirs and even being down for collabs, and I swear to God, I've seen that plenty of times in articles and videos and whatever. But to properly wrap up this review and give it a score out of 10, this is an album I knew I was going to rate very high. Like I said, it's my favourite album of 2019, and I'm sure you guys could have guessed from everything that I said and, it being a favourite from that year. So to give Fandom by the band Waterparks from 2019, a score out of 10. I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10. Consistently from this album's release, it's floated around the 9 to even 10 out of 10 mark for me. But I'd say there was a small patch in time which I was knowing this album really well, but just before I actually got my hands on a copy of this album to add to my shelf and collection, it wasn't higher on my rotation, but it was holding like a steady 9 and everything for a while. But once I finally got my hands on a copy and I was listening to it more, and I'm not the only one that's gone through this. Everyone has things like this happen in their life. But after I had certain things happen in my life and finding personal relation to a lot of the messages within this album, I just found a new passion for it and a new love, and I had to bump it up that extra 0.5. So like I said, I found a little bit of relation to some of the songs, and like I said, I'm a fan of their how they go about their music and everything. So a 9.5 feels right for the album Fandom by the band Waterparks. If you have a different opinion on this album or want to share your thoughts, hit me up in the comments below. I'll also have a track list ranking video out at the same time where I go through the entire track list and rank it from my least favorite song to favorite song. But thank you for joining me for this random album review, guys. Like I said, Waterparks album Fandom, I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10. And thank you for joining me for this video, guys, and I'll see you for another video soon. Peace.